The candles on Malcolm's 38th birthday cake flickered like tiny warning signals, casting dancing shadows across the dining room where our extended family had gathered. I should have paid attention to those warnings. "So, Malcolm," my brother-in-law Arthur was saying, cutting into his slice of chocolate cake, "what do you think about Piper switching to that private school? The one with the advanced math program?" I watched my husband straighten in his chair, that familiar spark of interest lighting up his quiet features. Malcolm loved talking about our daughter's education. He'd spent hours researching schools, comparing curricula, even visiting campuses on his lunch breaks from the courthouse where he worked as a stenographer. "Actually, I've been looking into that," Malcolm began, his voice gaining confidence. "The Montessori approach they use for younger students really emphasizes—" "Oh, please," I interrupted with a laugh, waving my wineglass dismissively. The Pinot Grigio had made me bold, and the room full of family members felt like the perfect audience. "We don't actually listen to him about school decisions. I mean, come on, I make all the real decisions around here." The laughter that erupted from around the table was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Arthur chuckled, shaking his head. Naomi, my best friend and Piper's godmother, giggled into her napkin. Even Malcolm's mother Greta managed a polite smile, though I caught something uncomfortable flickering across her weathered features. "Mom's the boss," 7-year-old Piper chimed in from her booster seat, clapping her hands together. I'd been teaching her that phrase for months. It always got a good reaction at family gatherings. "That's right, sweetheart," I said, reaching over to ruffle her dark curls. "Mommy handles the important stuff." Malcolm had gone completely still beside me. The animated expression had drained from his face, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. He picked up his fork and took a mechanical bite of cake, his jaw working slowly. "Malcolm does plenty around the house," Greta said quietly, her tone carrying a subtle edge. "He's always been very thoughtful about—" "Oh, he's great with dishes and laundry," I said breezily, not wanting to lose my momentum. The wine was singing in my veins, and I felt clever and sharp. "But the big decisions? That's my department, right, honey?" I nudged Malcolm's shoulder playfully. He looked at me for a long moment, those pale blue eyes unreadable. "Right," he said finally. His voice was so quiet I almost missed it. The conversation moved on to other topics. Arthur's new promotion at the accounting firm, Naomi's latest dating disasters, Greta's garden club drama. But I noticed Malcolm didn't contribute much for the rest of the evening. He sat there like a statue, methodically eating his cake and responding to direct questions with single-word answers. When everyone was leaving, hugging goodbye in our front hallway, Arthur pulled Malcolm aside. "Good cake, man," he said, clapping his brother on the shoulder. "Sorry about, Ves was just being funny." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Yeah, funny." After the door closed behind the last guest, I found Malcolm in the kitchen, scraping plates into the garbage disposal. The mechanical grinding sound filled the silence between us. "Great party," I said, starting to load the dishwasher. "Everyone seemed to have a good time." Malcolm didn't respond. He just kept scraping plates with methodical precision, his movements controlled and deliberate. "You're not upset about the school thing, are you?" I asked, though I kept my tone light. "You know I was just joking around. Everyone knows you're involved with Piper's stuff." "Do they?" Malcolm asked quietly. He set down the plate he'd been cleaning and turned to look at me. "Do they really know that, Ves?" Something in his voice made me pause. There was an odd quality to it, not anger exactly, but something cooler and more concerning. "Of course they do," I said, forcing a laugh. "God, you're so sensitive sometimes. It was just family dinner conversation." Malcolm nodded slowly, like he was filing away my response somewhere important. Then he pulled out his phone and made a note in what looked like a calendar app. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just keeping track," he said simply. He finished cleaning the kitchen in silence while I went upstairs to put Piper to bed. Our daughter was still wound up from the party, chattering about the cake and presents as I helped her into her pajamas. Daddy looks sad during dinner, she said as I tucked her under her covers. Daddy's fine, sweetheart. He was just tired from work. But you said we don't listen to him about school stuff. That made him look sad. I smoothed her hair back from her forehead. That's just how families work, Piper. Mummies usually make the big decisions because we're better at that kind of thing. Daddies help with other stuff. Piper nodded solemnly, absorbing this wisdom. So I should listen to you, not Daddy? Well, you should listen to both of us. But if we disagree about something important, then yes, you listen to Mommy. When I came back downstairs, Malcolm was sitting at his laptop in the guest room we used as a home office. The screen was angled away from the door, but I could see he was typing something. Working late? I asked from the doorway. Just organizing some files, he said without looking up. I shrugged and went to our bedroom to get ready for bed. Malcolm was always organizing something. It was part of his personality. As a court stenographer, he was obsessed with documentation and record keeping. Sometimes I thought he approached our marriage like it was a legal proceeding. When he finally came to bed an hour later, I was already half asleep. He slipped under the covers quietly, careful not to wake me. "Malcolm?" I murmured into my pillow. "Yeah?" "I really was just joking at dinner. You know that, right?" There was a long pause before he answered. "I know exactly what you were doing, Ves." His voice was so calm and matter-of-fact that it sent a small chill down my spine. But the wine and exhaustion pulled me under before I could think too much about what he meant. If I'd been paying closer attention, I might have noticed that Malcolm had started carrying a small leather notebook in his jacket pocket. I might have wondered why he'd begun setting his phone to record during our conversations. I might have asked why he was suddenly so interested in backing up all our digital files to the cloud, but I was too busy basking in the afterglow of my successful performance at dinner. I'd established my position as the decision-maker in our household, gotten some good laughs, and put Malcolm in his place, all while maintaining the appearance of playful marital banter. It was exactly the kind of social maneuvering I excelled at. I'd been doing it for years, gradually training our family and friends to see me as the competent, decisive partner, while Malcolm faded into the background as the quiet, passive husband. What I didn't realize was that Malcolm had been paying very close attention to my performance too. And unlike our dinner guests, he wasn't laughing. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, I was reviewing our bank statements when I noticed Malcolm's quarterly bonus from the court system had been deposited. $1,500, not a fortune, but enough to cover the new laptop I'd been wanting for work. Malcolm was in the shower when I transferred the money from our joint checking account to my personal savings. It was a simple online transaction that took less than 30 seconds. We'd talked about me getting a new computer months ago, and this bonus was perfect timing. Well, we'd sort of talked about it. I'd mentioned needing an upgrade, and Malcolm had made some non-committal sounds about looking at the budget. But that was typical Malcolm, always wanting to research and analyze instead of just making decisions. This was easier. I'd handle the purchase myself and tell him about it later. The next morning, I was making coffee when Malcolm appeared in the kitchen with his laptop, frowning at the screen. "Ves, did you move money yesterday? I'm looking at our checking account and my bonus deposit is gone." I kept my voice casual as I poured cream into my mug. "Oh, right. I transferred it to my account to buy that laptop we discussed, the one for my work presentations." Malcolm looked up from his screen. "We discussed it?" "Of course we did, remember? A few months ago I mentioned needing something with better graphics capabilities for the client presentations at the firm." "I remember you mentioning it," Malcolm said slowly, "but I don't remember us agreeing to spend $1,500 on it." I turned to face him, letting a note of exasperation creep into my voice. "Malcolm, I can't run every little purchase by you. This is for work. It's practically a business expense. Besides, it's not like we're struggling financially." "It's not about the money," he said quietly. "It's about making decisions together." "Look," I said, keeping my tone light but sharp enough to end the discussion. If it makes you feel better, I'll show you the laptop specs before I buy it. But honestly, you don't really understand the technical requirements for my job anyway. Malcolm stared at me for a long moment, the kind of stare that used to make me feel guilty because it felt so patient. This time, it didn't feel patient. It felt recorded. Then he lowered his gaze and tapped his phone, thumbs moving in that same note app he'd been using at his birthday dinner, the one he always claimed was for reminders, as if he was the only adult in the room who needed a system to remember reality. "What are you writing down?" I asked, and I hated how defensive I sounded, because defensiveness is its own confession. "Just keeping track of expenses," he said without looking up, "for budgeting purposes." Budgeting. The word almost made me laugh. Malcolm had never cared about budgets until he started caring about evidence. He cared now because numbers were clean. Numbers didn't argue back. Numbers couldn't be gaslit. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself I had a right to invest in my work. I told myself he was being dramatic. And still, when he walked out of the room, I felt my stomach tighten because the air had changed in the house. Everything felt like it had a paper trail now. That afternoon, while Malcolm was at work, I drove to the electronics store with my mind already made up. The place was bright and sterile, rows of glossy screens and carefully staged displays designed to make you feel like buying something expensive was self-care. A young salesperson asked what I needed, and I launched into my explanation with confident precision. Graphics-heavy presentations, client-facing work, the need for speed and reliability, because I did know what I needed, and because I liked the feeling of sounding competent to someone who wasn't quietly judging me. He showed me 3 options. I chose the best one, of course. I always chose the best one. Then I added the extended warranty and a software package the salesperson insisted was industry standard. When he turned the screen toward me to confirm the total, I saw the number and felt a brief flicker of hesitation. $1,700. It wasn't the original price. It was the upgraded reality. But I had enough in my personal account to cover the difference, and that mattered to me in a specific way. It meant I could tell myself I wasn't taking from us. I was taking from me. It meant I could tell myself this wasn't selfishness, it was independence. I swiped my card, signed the receipt, and walked out with the box tucked under my arm like a trophy. On the drive home, I rehearsed how I would present it. Not as a purchase, but as an investment. Not as a decision I'd made alone, but as something Malcolm should be proud of. I pictured myself setting it up at the kitchen table, smiling, controlling the scene the way I always did, because if I acted confident enough, the conversation would follow my script. When Malcolm got home that evening, I was already unboxing it, peeling back the plastic, plugging in the charger, arranging everything neatly. The laptop looked expensive in that clean, minimal way, sleek silver catching the light. It made the kitchen feel like a showroom. "It's gorgeous, isn't it?" I said, running my hand over the surface like I was introducing a guest. "The graphics card alone is worth the investment. I'll be able to create much more professional presentations for clients." Malcolm stood a few feet away and examined it without touching it, his face unreadable. He didn't say, "Wow." He didn't say, "Nice." He didn't even ask about the specs, which would have been the normal way to play along. Instead, he asked the one question that stripped away my story and left only the number. "How much was it?" The words were calm, almost casual, but I could hear something under them, a tightness that wasn't anger. It was caution. Like he was standing on a floor he no longer trusted to hold his weight. I smiled quickly, too quickly. "It was a good deal," I said, as if deals changed totals. Malcolm's eyes stayed on mine. "How much?" he repeated, and this time it wasn't a question so much as a line being drawn. I could have lied. I felt the temptation rise like a reflex, the same reflex that had saved me in arguments for years. I could have said 1,500. I could have said around 12. I could have said I used points. I could have wrapped it in enough vague language that he'd either drop it or accept the fog. But then I saw his phone on the counter near his keys, face down, and I realized he didn't need my answer to be precise. He just needed to watch whether I tried to bend it. 1,700, I admitted, and I tried to make my tone sound proud, like honesty was a choice I'd made confidently. That includes the warranty and the software. Malcolm nodded slowly, not approving, not angry, just noting. Did you use the joint account? He asked. No, I said quickly. Personal account. Mine. He paused, then lifted his phone and typed something, thumbs moving with that same steady rhythm. Tap. Pause. Tap again. It's for work, I added, because I needed him to understand, because I needed the purchase to stay in the category of reasonable. It's not just a toy, Malcolm. This is literally for my income. He looked at the laptop again, then back at me, and his expression was so neutral it made me want to scream. I'm sure that's how you see it, he said softly, the exact same phrase he'd used before, the phrase that always felt like a dismissal disguised as politeness, and suddenly the laptop on the table didn't feel like a trophy anymore. It felt like another entry in his quiet list, another timestamp, another number, another example. I swallowed and forced a laugh that sounded strange even to me. You're really doing the budgeting thing now, I asked, trying to make it a joke, trying to drag the moment back into the safe zone where he smiled and I controlled the tone. Malcolm didn't smile. I'm just keeping track, he said again, but his voice had changed slightly, more formal, more careful. It's important to know what's happening with money. I felt my skin prickle. Are you implying I'm irresponsible? I'm not implying anything, he replied, and there was that calm again, the calm that made every question feel like a trap. I'm documenting. Documenting. That word hit like a slap. Because budgeting wasn't his real goal. I could feel it. I could hear it in the way he chose his words, in the way he refused to react emotionally, in the way he kept his hands off the laptop like it wasn't a shared object, like it was evidence sitting in plain sight. I stood there with my hand resting on the sleek silver lid, suddenly aware that I wasn't showing off a new tool. I was adding another item to a case file I couldn't see. 1,700, but look at these specs. 1,700. Malcolm's voice was sharp. You said 15. The bonus was 15. I covered the difference from my own account. Ves, that's not the point. We agreed to talk about major purchases. I felt my patience wearing thin. We did talk about it, this morning, and honestly, Malcolm, I don't need your permission to spend money on work equipment. I make more than enough to justify this expense. It was true. My salary as an administrative coordinator at the PR firm was about 20% higher than Malcolm's court stenographer wages. I'd been reminding him of this fact more frequently lately, especially when he questioned my spending decisions. It's not about permission, Malcolm said. It's about respect. And communication. I am communicating. I'm telling you about the laptop right now. Malcolm pulled out his phone and made another note. This time he didn't try to hide what he was doing. Seriously, what is with all the note-taking lately? I asked. It's getting weird. I'm documenting our conversations about financial decisions, Malcolm said calmly, since we seem to remember them differently. Something about his tone made me uncomfortable. That's actually pretty passive-aggressive, Malcolm. Is it? He looked at me with those unreadable blue eyes. Or is it just being thorough? The next week, I noticed that several pieces of mail that usually came to the house, bank statements, credit card bills, tax documents, had stopped arriving. When I asked Malcolm about it, he claimed he hadn't noticed. Maybe there's a mail delivery issue, he suggested. You could call the post office. But I was too busy with work to chase down missing mail. My boss Braden had been giving me more responsibilities lately, including some high-profile client accounts that required a lot of after-hours coordination. The new laptop was already proving its worth for the detailed presentations these clients expected. Braden was impressed with my initiative. He'd started inviting me to strategy meetings that used to be above my level, asking for my input on campaign directions and client management approaches. "You've got instincts for this business," he told me one evening as we worked late on a pitch for a major retail client. "Most people in admin positions don't see the bigger picture the way you do." Braden was everything Malcolm wasn't: decisive, ambitious, confident in his opinions. At 46, he'd built the PR firm from nothing into one of the most respected agencies in the city. When he spoke, people listened. When he made decisions, things happened. "I've always thought I could handle more responsibility," I admitted, "but it's hard to advance when everyone sees you as just the administrative coordinator." "Maybe it's time to change how people see you," Braden said. His dark eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Starting with the people closest to you." That night, I came home to find Malcolm organizing files in the guest room office. He'd set up a new filing system with labeled folders and had been scanning documents for hours. "Spring cleaning?" I asked from the doorway. "Just getting our records organized," Malcolm said. I realized we've been pretty sloppy about keeping track of important documents. "What kind of documents?" "Bank statements, tax returns, insurance policies, communication records." He gestured to a thick folder labeled Financial Correspondence. "Did you know our tax preparer has been trying to reach us? Apparently there are some questions about our joint return." I felt a small spike of anxiety. "What kind of questions?" "I'm not sure. The letters were forwarded to your office address. I had to call him directly to find out why we hadn't responded." "My office address?" I tried to keep my voice casual. "That's weird. I never changed our mailing address." Malcolm pulled out a form from one of his folders. "Actually, you did, last month. I have a copy of the change of address request you submitted to the Postal Service." He handed me the document. It was definitely my signature, though I didn't remember filling it out. "Oh, right," I said quickly. "I was having some issues with mail theft in our neighborhood. I thought it would be safer to have sensitive documents sent to my office." "Mail theft?" Malcolm's voice was carefully neutral. "You didn't mention that." "I didn't want to worry you. It was probably nothing, but better safe than sorry." Malcolm nodded and made another note in his phone. "I'll need copies of any financial documents that have been sent to your office, for our records." "Of course," I said. "I'll bring them home tomorrow." But the next day I was swamped with client work and forgot about the documents. And the day after that, Braden asked me to stay late for another strategy session. We were reviewing campaign metrics in his corner office when he opened a bottle of wine. "This client is going to make us both look very good," he said, pouring 2 glasses of an expensive Cabernet. "Your presentation concepts are exactly what they're looking for." "I love the creative challenge," I said, accepting the wine. "It's so different from just coordinating schedules and managing administrative tasks." "You're wasted in that position," Braden said bluntly. "You should be developing strategy, not filing paperwork." The wine was making me bold. "Sometimes I feel like my potential is wasted in other areas of my life too." Braden raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "My husband doesn't really understand what I do here. He thinks my job is just answering phones and organizing meetings. He has no idea about the strategic work, the client relationships, the creative development." "Sounds limiting," Braden said. His voice had dropped to a more intimate register. "It is. He's very traditional. He thinks major decisions should be joint decisions, even when one person clearly has better judgment." "And you have better judgment." I met his gaze directly. "In most areas, yes, I do." Braden smiled and moved closer to where I was sitting on his office couch. "I've noticed that about you. You see opportunities that other people miss." When I finally got home that night, it was almost midnight. Malcolm was asleep, but he'd left a note on my pillow asking about the financial documents I'd promised to bring home. I crumpled up the note and threw it away. Malcolm's obsession with paperwork was getting ridiculous. We were married, not business partners. He needed to trust me to handle things efficiently, instead of micromanaging every detail. What I didn't know was that Malcolm had already contacted our tax preparer directly and obtained copies of all the documents that had been forwarded to my office. He'd also called our bank to inquire about the address change and had been quietly reviewing our credit reports for any irregularities. The leather notebook he carried everywhere was filling up with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of our conversations. Every dismissal, every financial decision made without consultation, every instance of what he was beginning to recognize as a deliberate pattern of control and isolation. Malcolm had spent years documenting testimony in courtrooms, learning to recognize the difference between truth and manipulation. Now he was applying those same skills to his own marriage, and he was building a case. The first time I stayed overnight at Braden's condo, I told Malcolm I was attending a client dinner that would run late, followed by an early morning strategy session. It wasn't technically a lie. We did discuss strategy, just not the kind that involved client campaigns. Braden's downtown condo was everything our suburban house wasn't: sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The furniture was expensive and minimalist, the kind of aesthetic that screamed success and sophistication. "This place is incredible," I said, accepting a glass of champagne as I stood by the windows watching the lights twinkle below. "It's a good investment," Braden said, moving to stand behind me. "Location, location, location." When his hand settled on my shoulders, I didn't pull away. When he turned me around and kissed me, I kissed him back, and when he led me to his bedroom, I followed without hesitation. I'd been thinking about this moment for weeks, not just the physical attraction, though Braden was undeniably magnetic, but what he represented. Power, ambition, a life where my opinions mattered and my intelligence was valued. "You're incredible," he murmured afterward, as we lay tangled in his Egyptian cotton sheets. "I've been wanting this since the day you started at the firm." "Really?" I traced patterns on his chest with my fingertip. "You hid it well." I'm good at patience when something is worth waiting for. The next morning, I used Braden's shower and borrowed one of his dress shirts to wear under my suit jacket. He made coffee in his gleaming kitchen while I checked my phone for messages from Malcolm. There was only one text. "Hope the client dinner went well. See you tonight." "Guilt?" Braden asked, noticing my expression. "Not guilt exactly," I said. "Just logistics." "Logistics can be managed," Braden said smoothly, "especially when both parties benefit from the arrangement." He was right, of course. Malcolm and I had been growing apart for years. Our marriage had settled into a comfortable but passionless routine of shared responsibilities and polite conversation. What I'd found with Braden was electric, energizing in a way that made me feel alive again. And it wasn't just about the affair. Braden was mentoring me professionally, giving me opportunities to showcase my abilities and advance my career. Under his guidance, I was becoming the person I'd always known I could be. The strategy sessions became a regular occurrence. Sometimes we actually worked, developing campaign concepts, reviewing client feedback, planning presentations, but more often, we talked about my potential, my future at the firm, and the limitations I was facing in my personal life. "You're too smart to be held back by someone else's insecurities," Braden said one evening, as we shared takeout from an expensive sushi restaurant. "Malcolm sounds like he needs you to stay small so he can feel important." "He's not malicious," I said, though I was beginning to wonder if that was true. "He's just cautious, risk-averse. He wants to analyze everything to death instead of just making decisions and moving forward." "That's a fundamental incompatibility," Braden observed. "You're a strategic thinker. He's a clerk." It was harsh but accurate. Malcolm's job was essentially clerical, recording other people's words, filing documents, following procedures. He didn't create anything or lead anyone. He just maintained systems that other people had designed. Meanwhile, I was developing marketing strategies that influenced consumer behavior and shaped brand perception. I was building relationships with high-profile clients and contributing to campaigns that generated millions in revenue. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. At home, Malcolm's behavior was getting stranger. He'd started asking detailed questions about my work schedule, wanting to know specific times for meetings and client events. When I gave him general answers, he'd press for more details. "The Morrison account dinner," he said one morning over breakfast. "What restaurant are you going to?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, buttering my toast. "Braden is handling the reservation." "Braden's going to be there?" "Of course, he's the account lead." Malcolm made one of his now familiar notes in his phone. "What time should I expect you home?" "I have no idea, Malcolm. It's a client dinner, not a scheduled appointment. These things run as long as they need to run." "Right," Malcolm said quietly, "as long as they need to." That evening, there was no Morrison account dinner. Braden and I spent the night at his condo, ordering room service and planning my transition into a more senior role at the firm. He'd been hinting about creating a new position for me, something with strategic in the title and a significant salary increase. "You'd be perfect for client relationship management," he said as we shared a bottle of wine on his terrace. "You understand what motivates people. You know how to get what you want." "Do I?" I asked, feeling bold from the wine and the city lights and the intoxicating sense of possibility. "You're here, aren't you?" Braden smiled and pulled me closer. "You saw what you wanted and you took it." When I got home the next morning, Malcolm was in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes taking in my slightly wrinkled clothes and the fact that I was carrying my heels instead of wearing them. "How was the dinner?" he asked. "Long," I said. "I ended up staying at Naomi's place instead of driving home late." Malcolm nodded and handed me a cup of coffee. "Naomi called here around 10 last night. She was looking for you." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "She probably called my cell after that. I had it on silent during dinner." "Probably," Malcolm agreed. He made another note in his phone. "Seriously, Malcolm, what is all this note-taking about? It's getting obsessive." "Just keeping track of schedules," he said calmly, "making sure I understand your work commitments." That afternoon, while Malcolm was at the courthouse, I went through his desk in the guest room office. The filing system he'd been building was more extensive than I'd realized. He had folders for bank statements, tax documents, insurance policies, and something labeled communication log that was locked in a small filing cabinet. I tried several combinations on the lock but couldn't get it open. Whatever Malcolm was keeping in there, he didn't want me to see it. The thought should have worried me more than it did, but I was distracted by a text from Braden about a weekend strategy retreat he wanted me to attend, a chance to work with senior staff on long-term planning for the firm's biggest clients. "It's exactly the kind of high-level exposure you need," he wrote. 2 days at a resort in the mountains, all expenses paid. I texted back immediately, "Count me in." When Malcolm got home that evening, I was already packing a weekend bag. "Where are you going?" he asked from the bedroom doorway. "Work retreat," I said, folding a silk blouse into my suitcase. "Strategy planning for Q4. Very last minute, but it's a great opportunity." "When will you be back?" "Sunday evening, maybe Monday morning if the sessions run late." Malcolm watched me pack for a few minutes, then pulled out his phone and made another note. "You know what, Malcolm? This note-taking thing is really starting to feel invasive, like you're surveilling me or something." "Am I?" Malcolm asked quietly. "Are you what?" "Surveilling you?" The question caught me off guard. There was something in his tone that I couldn't quite identify. Not accusation exactly, but something cooler and more analytical. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, zipping up my suitcase. "I'm your wife, not a criminal defendant." Right, Malcolm said. My wife. That weekend at the mountain resort, Braden and I barely left his suite. We ordered room service, opened expensive wine, and talked about our future, both professional and personal. This can't go on indefinitely, he said as we lay in bed Sunday morning. The sneaking around, the cover stories. It's not sustainable. I know, I said. I've been thinking about that too. What are you thinking? I traced circles on his chest, gathering courage. I'm thinking maybe it's time for some major life changes. Such as? Maybe Malcolm and I have grown as far apart as we're going to grow. Braden was quiet for a long moment. That's a big decision. It is, but I can't keep living a life that feels too small for who I'm becoming. When I got home Sunday night, Malcolm was in the guest room office typing on his laptop. The locked filing cabinet was open, and I could see thick folders full of documents. How was the retreat? He asked without looking up from his screen. Productive, I said. Lots of strategic planning for next quarter. Good, Malcolm said. I'm glad it was worth missing Piper's soccer game. I froze. I'd completely forgotten about Piper's game. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I totally spaced on the schedule. How did she do? She scored 2 goals, Malcolm said calmly. She kept looking for you in the stands. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I feel terrible. I'll make it up to her. I'm sure you will, Malcolm said. He made another note in his phone, then looked at me directly. By the way, I called the resort to let you know about the game time change. They said they didn't have any guests registered under your name. The blood drained from my face. What? The Mountain View Resort, where you said the retreat was being held. They checked their registration system twice. No Vesperine Lorraine. My mind raced, trying to construct a plausible explanation. It must have been under the company name, or maybe Braden made the reservation. Maybe, Malcolm said. His voice was perfectly calm, perfectly neutral. What was his last name again? I could call back and check. That's not necessary, I said quickly. I'm sure it was just a registration mix-up. Malcolm nodded and turned back to his laptop. I'm sure you're right. But as I headed upstairs to shower, I heard the familiar sound of him making another note in his phone, and for the first time, I wondered exactly what kind of case my husband was building against me. The custody evaluation was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, and I spent the entire week preparing Piper for what to expect. The evaluator, Dr. Sarah Chen, would be asking questions about our family life, and I wanted to make sure my daughter understood how to answer appropriately. Remember, sweetheart, I said as I braided her hair that morning, Dr. Chen might ask you about who makes decisions in our family. What do you say? Mommy makes the important decisions, Piper recited dutifully. Daddy helps with little things. That's right, and if she asks about school or activities or where you live, what do you say? I want to stay with Mommy because Mommy knows what's best for me. Perfect, baby, you're so smart. Malcolm had been pushing for joint custody in our separation proceedings, which was absolutely ridiculous. He worked full-time at the courthouse, often with unpredictable hours when trials ran late. I had a more flexible schedule and had always been Piper's primary caregiver. More importantly, I understood what Piper needed in ways that Malcolm simply didn't. He would have her reading technical manuals and doing advanced math problems all day if I didn't intervene. I knew how to balance structure with creativity, education with social development. The evaluation went smoothly. Dr. Chen was a pleasant woman in her 40s who made Piper feel comfortable with games and drawing exercises before moving on to more direct questions. Who do you talk to when you have problems? Dr. Chen asked. Mommy, Piper said confidently. Mommy always knows how to fix things. What about Daddy? Do you talk to him about problems too? Piper hesitated and I held my breath. We'd practiced this scenario several times. Daddy is nice, Piper said carefully, but Mommy makes the decisions about important things. Daddy doesn't really decide stuff. Dr. Chen made notes on her clipboard. What kind of important things does Mommy decide? School things, and where we go on vacation, and what activities I can do. Daddy just helps with little things. What kind of little things? Like making breakfast and helping with homework, but Mommy decides if the homework is right or wrong. Perfect. Piper was doing exactly what we'd practiced. After the evaluation, I took Piper out for ice cream to celebrate how well she'd done. You were wonderful in there, sweetheart. Dr. Chen could see how mature and smart you are. Did I say the right things? Piper asked, licking her strawberry cone. You said the truth. That's always the right thing. But later that week, Malcolm requested a second evaluation session with a different professional. Something about wanting a more comprehensive assessment of Piper's adjustment to our separation. I was annoyed but not worried. Piper knew the script, and she understood that consistency was important. Children needed clear guidelines about authority and decision-making, especially during family transitions. The second evaluator, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, met with Piper at her school during lunch period. I wasn't allowed to be present, which seemed unnecessarily restrictive, but I trusted my daughter to handle the situation appropriately. That evening, I asked Piper how the meeting had gone. It was okay, she said, but she seemed less confident than she'd been after the first evaluation. What kinds of questions did Dr. Rodriguez ask? The same kinds of questions as the other lady, about who I talk to and who makes decisions and stuff. And what did you say? Piper was quiet for a moment, picking at her dinner. I said what you taught me to say. Good girl. That's exactly right. But something in her tone made me uneasy. That night, after putting Piper to bed, I found Malcolm in the guest room office with his laptop and his ever-present filing system. How do you think the second evaluation went? I asked casually. Malcolm looked up from his screen. I think Dr. Rodriguez got a very clear picture of the situation. Meaning what? Meaning he's very experienced at recognizing when children have been coached. My stomach clenched. Coached? That's ridiculous. I just explained to Piper what kinds of questions she might be asked. That's called preparation, not coaching. Is it? Malcolm's voice was maddeningly calm. What exactly did you tell her to say? I told her to tell the truth, that I handle most of the parenting decisions because I have more flexibility in my schedule and more experience with child development. Malcolm made a note in his phone. And did you tell her to say that I don't really decide stuff? The specific phrase made my blood run cold. I might have used those words, but it's essentially accurate, Malcolm. You've never been the primary decision-maker when it comes to Piper. Haven't I? Malcolm pulled out a thick folder from his filing cabinet. Let me read you something from Dr. Rodriguez's preliminary notes. He opened the folder and found a specific page. When asked about family decision-making, subject initially provided rehearsed-sounding responses about mother handling important things and father only helping with little things. However, when questioned more specifically about daily routines, subject revealed that father regularly makes decisions about homework help, bedtime stories, weekend activities, and meal planning. Subject seemed confused about the discrepancy between her scripted answers and her actual experiences. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Those notes are supposed to be confidential. They are, but Dr. Rodriguez shared his concerns with my attorney, who shared them with me. Apparently, when Piper was asked to draw a picture of our family, she drew me reading her bedtime stories and helping with math homework. When asked about the drawing, she said, Daddy does decide some important things, but I'm not supposed to say that. The room seemed to be spinning. She's 7 years old, Malcolm. She gets confused about adult conversations. Does she? Malcolm pulled out another document. Because Dr. Rodriguez also spoke with Piper's teacher, Mrs. Patterson. According to her notes, Piper has been telling classmates that her Mommy said Daddy doesn't get to decide things anymore because Mommy and Daddy don't live together. I never said that. Didn't you? Malcolm's blue eyes were steady and unforgiving. Because according to Mrs. Patterson, Piper also said that you've been practicing the right answers for when people ask questions about our family. I could feel control of the situation slipping away from me. This is all being taken out of context. I was trying to help Piper understand a complex situation. By teaching her to lie. By teaching her to present our family structure accurately. Malcolm closed the folder and looked at me directly. Ves, do you understand what parental alienation is? Of course I do. It's when one parent turns a child against the other parent, which is not what's happening here. Isn't it? Malcolm pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes. Let me read you some of the phrases Piper has used in the past month, according to multiple witnesses. Daddy doesn't decide things. Mommy is the boss. Daddy just helps with little things. Mommy knows what's best. These aren't the natural words of a 7-year-old, Ves. These are scripts. They're just ways of helping her understand our family dynamics. Our family dynamics, Malcolm repeated slowly. You mean the dynamics where you make unilateral decisions about finances, ignore my input on parenting choices, mock me in front of relatives, and now coach our daughter to minimize my role in her life? The accusation hung in the air between us. I could see years of resentment in Malcolm's eyes, carefully catalogued and documented in his obsessive filing system. I have never tried to turn Piper against you, I said firmly. Everything I've done has been in her best interest. Malcolm nodded and made another note in his phone. I'm sure that's how you see it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. That was what made it feel so insulting. If he'd snapped back, if he'd shown anger, I could have treated it like a fight. But Malcolm didn't fight like that. Malcolm collected. That night, I lay awake staring into the darkness, thinking about the evaluator's questions, the careful pauses, the way she'd written things down without reacting. I replayed my own answers and wondered if I'd sounded as reasonable as I thought I did. I'd been so focused on securing primary custody, on building what I considered a clear case for stability, that I hadn't stopped to consider how my preparation with Piper might look to someone whose job was to detect influence. A professional evaluator didn't care about my internal logic. They cared about observable behavior, and the line between guidance and coaching was thinner than I wanted to admit. But it wasn't coaching. Not really. That was what I kept telling myself. I wasn't putting words in Piper's mouth. I wasn't instructing her to lie. I was simply helping her describe the reality we'd lived in. Malcolm was the passive partner. He always had been. He didn't plan. He didn't lead. He followed decisions until he resented them, then acted like the victim when the structure he benefited from began to feel restrictive. In my mind, this was the simplest truth in the world. Piper deserved clarity. She deserved language. She deserved to understand why I was the one who remembered dentist appointments and school projects and teacher emails, why I was the one who knew what size shoes she wore, why I was the one who noticed when her mood shifted and her sleep patterns changed. If Piper learned to articulate that, it wasn't manipulation, it was honesty. Except honesty looks different depending on who is holding the pen. I could hear Malcolm in the guest room office, the soft tapping of keys through the wall. Tap, 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 pause, tap again. It was past midnight, and the rhythm was maddening, not because it was loud, but because it was deliberate. It sounded like someone typing up a report. It sounded like a person who had already decided what the story would be and was just making sure the facts were arranged correctly. And that was the real problem. Malcolm wasn't trying to win me back or fix anything. He was building a narrative in a language that courts respect more than feelings. I rolled onto my side and watched the faint line of light under our bedroom door, the kind of light that makes you feel like you're not alone, except this time it felt like surveillance, a symbol of how far apart we'd become inside the same house. Even our separation had structure now. At 2 a.m, I got up and walked to the hallway. The guest room door was cracked open. Malcolm sat at the desk with his shoulders slightly hunched, eyes focused on the screen. Papers were spread out beside him in neat stacks, a yellow legal pad, a folder. His phone face down, like he didn't want the glow to give away whatever he'd been recording. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, not startled, not guilty, just observant, like he'd been waiting. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my tone level. "Organizing," he said simply. "Organizing what?" He hesitated just long enough to choose the safest word. Information. The word made my skin prickle. About me. He didn't deny it. He just leaned back slightly and folded his hands like a man in a meeting. "About our family," he corrected. I wanted to laugh. It would have been funny if it wasn't terrifying. "You're making me sound like a monster," I said. "I'm documenting," Malcolm replied. "There's a difference." "That's your favorite trick," I snapped before I could stop myself. "You stay quiet and collect little moments, then you string them together to make a picture that suits you." Malcolm's expression didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened. "Or," he said, "I'm finally not letting you rewrite what happens." That landed harder than I expected, not because it was fair, but because it was strategic. He wasn't arguing about who was right. He was framing the conflict in terms an evaluator could recognize. Rewriting, control, narrative dominance. Words that sounded clinical. Words that sounded like a pattern. I stared at him, suddenly aware of how easily he could flip the meaning of every interaction. If I raised my voice, it was aggression. If I asked questions, it was interrogation. If I tried to defend myself, it was deflection. The only safe move was silence, and silence wasn't my strength. "My intentions are good," I said, forcing myself to slow down. "Everything I've done is for Piper." Malcolm nodded once. "I'm sure you believe that." There it was again, that calm, infuriating non-argument, the tone of a man who didn't need to persuade me because he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the future version of this situation, the version that would be read in a report, presented in a hearing, repeated in a courtroom. I turned away before my face could give him more ammunition. Back in bed, I tried to breathe evenly, but my thoughts kept spiraling. I pictured the evaluator's report, imagined certain phrases appearing in it like stamps: parental alienation, coaching, controlling behavior, boundary issues. Each phrase carried weight. Each phrase could reshape Piper's entire childhood. I told myself it was unfair. I told myself courts should understand nuance. I told myself intentions should matter. But as the night dragged on, and Malcolm kept typing, I began to feel the sick truth settling in. Fairness isn't the standard by which these cases get decided. Evidence is. And evidence doesn't care how loving you believe you are. Evidence doesn't care that you think you're protecting your child. Evidence only cares what can be proven, what can be documented, what can be repeated in a neutral voice, without sounding emotional. I thought about every time I'd corrected Piper when she described something inaccurately, every time I'd said, "No, sweetheart, Daddy doesn't handle that," or, "Remember, Mommy is the one who..." Every time I'd helped her practice what she might say so she wouldn't get confused. In my mind, it had been preparation. In an evaluator's mind, it could look like scripting. I thought about the way I'd vented to friends within earshot, thinking Piper wasn't listening. I thought about the times I'd rolled my eyes when Malcolm spoke, the little gestures of contempt that feel harmless in the moment, but become damning when someone is collecting them. I thought about how often I'd use the phrase, "You know how he is," in front of Piper, like I was teaching her a conclusion instead of letting her form her own. The worst part was realizing Malcolm had probably been taking notes on those moments for months, maybe longer. Not because he was petty, but because he was patient. Malcolm's quietness had always fooled people into underestimating him, and I had done it too. I had mistaken his passivity for weakness, his silence for agreement, his compliance for surrender. Now I could hear it in his typing. It wasn't random. It was steady, purposeful. He wasn't reacting emotionally. He was building a case. And as I lay there listening, I felt something that wasn't just fear, but a dawning understanding of how this could end. If Malcolm had enough examples, enough timestamps, enough neutral descriptions of my behavior, he wouldn't need to convince anyone that I was manipulative. He'd just need to show a pattern and let the professionals label it for him, which meant my intentions, my love, my desire for stability, my belief that I was being honest, might not save me at all. Because in a custody case, love isn't what wins, credibility is. And Malcolm, quiet Malcolm, who I'd always thought of as the passive partner, was apparently very, very good at collecting the one thing I couldn't argue with: proof. The process server found me in Braden's glass-walled conference room on a Tuesday afternoon, right in the middle of our weekly strategy meeting. I saw him approaching through the transparent walls, a thin man in a cheap suit carrying a manila envelope, and somehow knew immediately that he was looking for me. "Vesperine Lorraine?" he asked when he knocked on the conference room door. "Yes," I said, aware that half the office was watching through the glass. "You've been served," he said, handing me the envelope. "Have a good day." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. The document inside was thick, at least 30 pages, with the heading, "Counter Petition for Dissolution of Marriage and Motion for Emergency Custody Modification." But it wasn't the legal language that made my blood run cold. It was the exhibits. Exhibit A, bank records showing unauthorized transfer of funds from joint account to personal account, with timestamps and transaction details. Exhibit B, postal service change of address form, redirecting mail to office address without spousal notification. Exhibit C, audio recordings of family conversations, with transcripts highlighting dismissive language and unilateral decision-making. Exhibit D, witness statements from family members describing pattern of public humiliation and controlling behavior. Exhibit E, child custody evaluation reports documenting coached responses and parental alienation attempts. Exhibit F, digital audit trail showing deletion of calendar entries and text messages with forensic recovery of deleted communications. The list went on for 3 pages. Every argument we'd had, every financial decision I'd made, every instance of what Malcolm characterized as coercive control was documented with dates, times, and supporting evidence. "Ves," Braden's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What is it?" I looked up to see him staring at me with concern. Around the conference table, my colleagues were pretending to focus on their laptops while obviously trying to listen to our conversation. I have to go," I said, stuffing the papers back into the envelope. "Is everything okay?" "It's fine, just family stuff. I'll call you later." I grabbed my purse and headed for the elevator, acutely aware of the curious stares following me through the office. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and read through the entire document with growing horror. Malcolm hadn't just been taking notes. He'd been building a comprehensive case that portrayed me as a manipulative, controlling spouse who had systematically isolated him from financial decisions, humiliated him in front of family, and attempted to alienate our daughter from him. The worst part was how convincing it all looked when presented this way. Every incident that I remembered as reasonable boundary setting or efficient decision-making was reframed as evidence of psychological abuse. The birthday dinner, where I'd joked about making the real decisions, became respondent's pattern of public humiliation, designed to diminish petitioners' parental authority in front of extended family. My transfer of Malcolm's bonus became respondent's unauthorized appropriation of petitioner's income without consultation or consent. My coaching of Piper became respondent's systematic attempt to alienate minor child from petitioner through scripted responses and false narratives. By the time I finished reading, I was crying in my car, in the parking garage of my office building, watching other people go about their normal lives, while mine fell apart in 30 pages of legal documentation. I called my friend Naomi from the car. Ves, what's wrong? You sound terrible. Malcolm served me with divorce papers, at work, in front of everyone. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over? I'm not at home. I'm sitting in my car trying to figure out what the hell just happened. What do you mean? I took a shaky breath. Naomi, he's been documenting everything, every conversation, every argument, every financial transaction. He has recordings, witness statements, bank records. It's like he's been preparing for this for months. Recordings? That's kind of creepy, Ves. It's more than creepy. It's devastating. He makes me sound like some kind of controlling monster who's been psychologically abusing him. There was a long pause before Naomi responded. Have you been? The question hit me like a slap. What do you mean, have I been? Naomi, you know me. You know I'm not an abusive person. I know you're not intentionally abusive, but Ves, some of the things you've said about Malcolm over the years, the way you talk about making decisions without him, the jokes about him not having opinions, I always thought it was just venting. But maybe what? Maybe Malcolm didn't see it as just venting. I felt like everyone in my life was suddenly turning against me. Whose side are you on here? I'm on your side, Naomi said quickly. I'm just saying that sometimes we don't realize how our words affect other people, especially people we live with every day. That evening, I drove home to find Malcolm calmly making dinner in our kitchen. Piper was at the table doing homework, and the scene looked so normal that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the entire afternoon. How was your day? Malcolm asked without looking up from the stove. You know how my day was, I said. You had me served with papers at my office, in front of my colleagues. I asked the process server to be discreet, Malcolm said mildly, but I can't control the timing of when you're in public spaces. You could have given them to me here, at home. Could I? Malcolm turned to look at me. When exactly? You're hardly ever here anymore. Piper looked up from her homework, sensing the tension in the room. Piper, sweetie, why don't you finish your homework in your room? I said. But I'm almost done, she protested. Room, now. After Piper left, I pulled out the legal documents and slammed them on the kitchen counter. This is insane, Malcolm. You make me sound like a criminal. Do I? Malcolm's voice was infuriatingly calm. Which part is inaccurate? All of it. You're taking normal marital disagreements and turning them into evidence of abuse. Normal marital disagreements, Malcolm repeated. Is that what you call taking my bonus without asking? Redirecting our mail so I can't see financial statements. Coaching our daughter to say I don't make decisions. I was managing our finances efficiently. I was protecting our mail from theft. I was helping Piper understand our family structure. Malcolm pulled out his phone and started an audio recording app. Say that again. What? Say that again. About managing finances efficiently and protecting mail and helping Piper understand our family structure. I stared at him. You're recording this conversation. I've been recording our conversations for months, Ves. It's all legal, single-party consent state, and it's all been very educational. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You've been recording me for months. Every conversation about money, parenting, or major decisions. Every time you've dismissed my input or made unilateral choices. Every time you've contradicted yourself about where you've been or what you've been doing. That's surveillance. That's paranoid behavior. Is it? Malcolm pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase. Let me play you something from last week. He scrolled through his phone and pressed play. My own voice filled the kitchen. Malcolm, I don't need your permission to spend money on work equipment. I make more than enough to justify this expense. Then Malcolm's voice. It's not about permission, it's about respect and communication. Then my voice again. I am communicating. I'm telling you about the laptop right now. Malcolm stopped the recording. Does that sound like a respectful conversation between equal partners to you? It sounds like a normal disagreement about spending priorities. Does it? Malcolm played another recording. We don't actually listen to him about school decisions. I mean, come on, I make all the real decisions around here. The sound of laughter in the background, his birthday dinner. How about that one? Malcolm asked. I felt cornered and desperate. Those are isolated incidents taken out of context. Isolated? Malcolm opened his folder and pulled out a typed list. I have 47 documented instances of you dismissing my input in front of other people. 32 instances of you making financial decisions without consultation. 18 instances of you contradicting previously agreed upon plans. And now evidence of an extramarital affair with your supervisor. The last sentence hit me like a bomb. What? Braden Ulrich, 46 years old, married, 2 children, your direct supervisor at the PR firm, the man you've been having strategy sessions with at his downtown condo. I couldn't breathe. How do you... Wi-Fi logs, Ves. Your phone automatically connects to networks you've used before. Braden's condo Wi-Fi shows your device connected overnight on 17 different occasions over the past 3 months. Occasions that correspond exactly with your claimed work dinners and strategy retreats. The kitchen was spinning around me. You hacked my phone? I didn't hack anything. I just paid attention to the data that was already there. Network logs, location services, calendar syncs, all the digital breadcrumbs that people leave behind when they're living double lives. I sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Malcolm's investigation. Why? I whispered. Why did you do all this? Malcolm sat down across from me, his expression softer than it had been in months. Because I needed to understand whether I was crazy, he said quietly. Whether I was imagining the dismissal, the control, the gradual erasure of my voice in our marriage. Whether I was being paranoid or whether there really was a pattern. And what did you conclude? I concluded that you've been systematically isolating me from decisions about our finances, our child, and our future. I concluded that you've been having an affair with your boss while gaslighting me about your whereabouts. And I concluded that you've been coaching our daughter to see me as irrelevant to her life. I looked at the man I'd been married to for 9 years, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Someone who had been quietly, methodically building a case against me, while I thought I was managing our life efficiently. What happens now? I asked. Malcolm closed his folder and stood up. Now we let the court decide whether my opinion counts for anything.